poisonous dragon of chaos and its false gospel subjectivism. I will start this talk out by defining a few specific terms, which is the basis for this discussion. Subjectivism is a philosophical theory that states that knowledge is ultimately based on subjective experience, such as one's perception, thought, reason, and emotion. It is opposed to objectivism, which holds that knowledge is derived from objective facts. Note that as a theory, relativism is a philosophical concept which asserts that knowledge, truth, and morality exist in relation to culture, context, and perspective. Additionally, it postulates that opposing beliefs and values within various societies are equally valid or of equal value. It suggests that it is difficult to judge one society according to the standards of another, and that any fact or moral judgment should be assessed within its own cultural context. Moral relativism is the belief that there is no universal, objective morality that applies to all people in all circumstances, and that instead morality is shaped by the norms, values, and beliefs of each individual or culture. This means that moral judgments and decisions can vary depending on the context in which they are being made. It is basically in all three definitions forms of the same lawlessness and chaos. It is a dragon of deception. Now let us get into the meat of the talk. This past year has been one of uncertainty and perplexity. The realities of a nation split in half by the malady of identity politics starkly reveal the complexity of American polity. The toxicity inherent within the intellectual and political elite has polluted the entire electorate. For me personally, this election cycle represented a greater reality, a battle between ideological and spiritual world views. The collective consciousness of America has been battered by the winds of relativism, subjectivism, and hyper-personal autonomy. The rise of the radical militant feminist bent upon obtaining ultimate power over all things, while attempting to destroy all vestiges of opposition, including the outright destruction or men and boys, betrays the true source of its delusional appearances. The zeitgeist showed its murderous face under the guise of the false feminine in the West while maintaining the false masculine in the Eastern Hemisphere. The intent and the result has been the same regardless of which mask worn by it: destruction of people. The tyranny of those owned by a lie seeks to use those whom are in its grasp as foot soldiers to wage war, and ultimately attempt to enslave those who yet remain free from its grasp. Discerning the mixture in civil authority. The unfortunate situation we have is this: the good public servants in the government pay the price for the poor ones. When people are angry at the government from whichever place on the political spectrum they view it from, they don't recognize all the amazing women and men in the government that are each day working diligently to serve the American people with little to no encouragement or acknowledgement of their hard work. They are often frustrated just like the rest of us at the corruption and inefficiencies and confusion that poor leadership and criminal elements cause. These noble public servants are immersed in the mess day after day, but we often forget that they are us, Americans, fellow citizens who are doing the best they can in a leviathan of bureaucratic red tape and corruption. They, however, are our first line of defense against the entangling serpents of tyranny which seek to co-opt the civil services for subversive and selfish means. This is rarely in the public consciousness due to the ever-flowing stream of power brokers attempting to use the civil government to feed their corrupt ways by manipulating the citizenry and their perceptions via public and private sector means. The corruptive influencers are not limited to domestic weeds alone. Many hostile foreign powers are at work against us. This nation cannot be subverted by the extreme polarity of such people and continue to function improperly. Likewise, the utter narcissism of certain relatively small factions in this nation, who are plentiful in the press and the broader mass media, are attempting to force their short-sighted and untimely twisted agendas upon the entire country in a time of great hardship for many citizens. They are the strain a gnat swallow a camel people who must not be allowed to continue subverting the entire nation in order to follow their lies and self-destructive world views. These are those whose allegiances are only with themselves and their twisted selfish desires. They are the bad apples in the apple cart of the nation. They are unprincipled and dangerous to the freedom of all Americans. We must stand against them and their lies. Likewise, we must do so also against organizations, companies, and various means and methods which, having been compromised, are utilized to trample down freedom of thought, speech, inquiry, and discussion. When good and decent men and women refuse to do nothing to stand against evil born of lies and deception, and evil grows unabated like weeds among the fields, choking out the true fruit of liberty, thereby replacing it with a facsimile of the real liberty that is only found and sustained by the truth and love, bringing about justice and mercy for all. One of the greatest enemies of true liberty is fear, for out of fear does come complacency, ignorance, and the confusion and division they ultimately sow among the people. The greatest enemy to true liberty is that of the corruption which is born out of jettisoning the light of the truth in order to serve the lie in the darkness of human hearts. This is an age-old problem. It is the problem of sin and rebellion towards that which is good and true. The standard of truth is not one of human reasoning, but rather the standard of God Almighty, who is the source and the sustainer of true liberty, free from the tyranny of sin, which so entangles and enslaves humanity and keeps humanity individually and collectively in a state of perpetual suffering and the world embroiled in conflict. This truth, when ignored and cast away from the hearts and minds of people, bring about serious destructive consequences to both the individual and the collective whole. When a nation goes its own way and attempts to reserve the right to determine what is good and evil in their own eyes apart from God, such a nation chooses to remove itself from the collective protection that the light of the truth gives freely to all people. The result is a nation in darkness, with ever-increasing problems born of the corruption birthed by departing from the way of truth unto the broad path that leads to destruction. When a nation collectively chooses this destructive path, it also chooses the consequences inherent in that choice. Yet in the darkness which descends upon such a nation, the people blame God for the very choices they choose, and God honors them by granting them their own way. These same ones then seek to blame others for the very choices they have made to serve a lie over truth. They do this despite the warnings and the consequences. Hence why I say it is the way of destruction, and many other who go within. You are in a much greater war than you might wish to accept, much less even fight. Regardless that war is occurring and is and will leave no person unaffected. The powers that be care little for one's personal preferences other than how they might co-opt them for use in waging war against you and your fellow citizens. Let us look at how they are doing that even now. Present reality from past disreality. A proper diagnosis these days do seem to be quite chaotic at many times and in many places. What you are now seeing is what happens when portions of the public and private leadership, as well as the population at large, deny objective truth in favor of the pathos of dogmatic subjectivism. Having done so, the society devolves into warring factions bent upon destroying each other, seeing any other point of view as hostile and perceived as threats to be eradicated. What manifests as accusations and conflict? Subjectivism always breaks down to such intellectual, moral, and ethical confusion. It always finds each faction demanding their version of subjective justice, while blind to the fact that their justice is actually unjust because it is born about the relativizing corruption of pride and polluted perception. For no justice can be rendered without objective truth reigning supreme above all subjective points of view. Hence, in demanding justice, they commit injustices, and in committing injustices only worsen their predicament. This creates a destructive feedback loop, whose gravity well exerts pulls on all people towards the opposing polarity. Its roots are in pride and fear. Thus, to maintain their resolute pride, they fuel their own fears with cyclical provocation feedback loops, which vacillate between victimizer and victim. The co-opted person exhibits a self-adherence to induced negative archetypal projections of their fears on their perceived opposition. The oppositional polarity serves the function as the binary manufactured validator fueling the self-referential oppositional paradigm. What you are seeing in the world at large, and specifically in the West, is what happens when portions of the leadership and population deny the existence of objective truth in favor of the pathos of dogmatic hypersubjectivism. Having done so, the society devolves into warring factions bent upon destroying each other, seeing any other point of view as hostile and perceived as threats to be eradicated. What manifests as accusations and conflict? Subjectivism always breaks down to such intellectual, moral, and ethical confusion. It always finds each faction demanding their version of subjective justice, while blinded to the fact that their justice is actually unjust because it is born about the relativizing corruption of pride and polluted perception. For no justice can be rendered without objective truth reigning supreme above all subjective points of view. Hence, in demanding justice, they commit injustices, and in committing injustices only worsen their predicament. This creates a destructive feedback loop, whose gravity well exerts pulls all people towards the abyss of opposing polarity. If all things are equally true, then nothing is true, and all are in error. For you cannot have a society based upon no foundation, for it is chaos. It is chaos which leads to destruction. So it is with the jettisoning of objective truth and concrete facts. Having done so, all devolve into utter confusion, with each doing what is right in their own eyes and demanding that all others bow to their personal preferences and proclivities, without regard to the sanity or validity of doing so. If truth is in the eye of the beholder, and not objectively truth, without regards to subjective points of view, and the resulting insanity fuels systemic entropy in all things. So what of those who have no love of the truth? Are they not turned over to a great delusion? What are you seeing occur in America and around the world? The rot of delusional hypersubjectivism afflicting the me, myself, and I narcissistic entitlement culture is having such amplified entropic effects that it is only exceeded by that of the poisoning of the peoples, tribes, tongues, and nations by pharmakeia. Likewise they are all ruled by fear and confusion. Such things lead to chaos and conflict. What about those who remain in it and do not seek the truth? What is their plight? Kingdoms of sandstone, the absurdity of this world is seen in its refusal to learn from history and one's own mistakes. This is true for both people and nations. We all have this vulnerability. The confusion which reigns supreme over our nation is clearly seen in its effects and outcomes. Nothing has caused more suffering than the rejection of truth and love lived out from the humble and contrite heart. For this reason, the very notions of justice and mercy have become polluted by perspective inversion and corrupted counterfeits. The result is a society which cannot discern even the most basic concepts which can preserve and uphold it. Without the authentic Jesus, we have as a nation created a myriad of Jesus which suit our personal preferences, creating a myth out of a truth embodied in the historical personage of the Son of God. Without the divine logos in the spirit of truth, we bequeath to ourselves confusion upon confusion from the written word, even as we deny the living word. What has rushed in to fill the void are shadows of the authentic, the howling out of the gospel lived out in community, and the broader nation has left us with but a remnant of living authentic believers. It has also left us with a kingdom without the king, where each individual acts as their own sovereign, ruling over all things from the bubble of their own self-generated reality fashioned of temporality, worshipping all that is temporary and fleeting. All kingdoms built on temporal from temporality will always yield but temporary gains due to the foundations on which they are built. Cruelty is a function of fear and hatred, born of lust, greed, and pride, forged and reinforced by lies and machinations. One can easily see the avarice and hubris throughout all history. Only the truth and love brings about justice and mercy from humble and contrite hearts. The same holds true for peoples and nations. History has clearly illustrated the human vulnerabilities leading to the propensity towards shadows of the real. Even so, there have always been a remnant in each generation who sought the truth and found it. The remnant are those who are set free from the inside out by the Spirit of truth, though they have had to live with the same propensities. Ye all struggle within mortal coils. The salvation and redemption of humanity from the darkness of lies and its chains thereof is only found in the gift of salvation, in the truth of the divine logos, which always transcends the works and wisdom of the way of the empires born of those same mortal coils. It is the truth which sets one free from the chains of the lies, and corruption thereof the lies always brings in order to chain people too. No one is smart enough, pure enough, or strong enough in their own wisdom and works to overcome their spiritual malady. You cannot work for gift. You can only accept it or refuse it. One reveals humility, and the other exposes pride and self-deception. Salvation is not built upon one's innate mortal capabilities and works. It is a gift offered to all who would accept it. God did this for good reason. It levels the ground for all and exposes the pride and insufficiencies apart from acceptance of the gift. God's love and respect for His creation, chief among creation being humanity, gives all humanity the choice. He does not force people to accept grace, and ultimate grace of the gift of salvation in the divine logos, as the despotic darkness tries to do in attempting to deceive people by lies in order to enslave them to its degenerate, destructive intents. The Tao of the autocrat and their despotic regimes are examples of the lie playing out in human history, revealing the insufficiency of the lies and the prideful hearts from which they are born. They promise so much and deliver so little for such a short time. They never stand the test of time, because they cannot stand against the truth which exposes them regardless of what they do to hide it, fight it, or eliminate it from their temporary sandstone kingdoms. Just as sandstone can appear to be a strong foundation on which to build until it is tested over time by fire, water, ice, wind, and earthquakes, so too are the kingdoms of this world who weaken over time due to their insufficient foundations and inherent vulnerabilities, which are always vulnerable to the same things all people are: lies, temptation, deception, confusion, pride, greed, corruption, and division. As it is for people, so too it is for nations. What is created by the vulnerable will be vulnerable. What is created by the corruptible will be vulnerable to corruption. What is built of temporal substance and limited temporal-based mortal wisdom and works will always be temporary. History reveals these things clearly, yet each generation is led astray into darkness, which blinds them in mind to the wrongness and peril of their way, having not learned it from history at large or their own pasts individually. The spirit of the age wages war against each generation, using their mortal vulnerabilities against them to first tempt, then ensnare and enslave them to the fear born of being made slaves to that which their minds have been blinded to, that they might be devoured and destroyed to sustain the lie of that dark zeitgeist. In this world, the peoples, tribes, tongues, and nations are dominated by the darkness of the spirit of the age, which co-opts all they create and attempt to do, to take those things by force in order to use it against them as instruments to dominate them in cruelty. This is meta war waged against every generation, to keep them in the darkness and not seeing their perilous predicament until they are enslaved and made to serve the lie which it is. The despotic regime is merely the outworking of the nation-state's reflection of the meta-enslavement of its constituency by the spirit of the age. The existential internal reality becomes the externalized reality when critical mass is reached in a society. It is the result of the aggregated desolation of individuals, which is encapsulated in the perversion of the state over the individuals and the peoples by the state. The cyclical feedback loop self-reinforces its control in the illusion of the synthetic cultural reality and the enforced Fox social contract. All of society devolves into a system of lies upheld by reinforcement systems which promote lies as truth, while denying the actual truth. The nature of a lie is one bent on exploiting and deceiving the generations by means of the corruptible nature of their mortal coils. The lie makes proxies out of people who are often blinded in their deception, how they are being co-opted and used both against their own best interests as well as that of others. The lie convinces those under its influence the rightness of their wrongness, inverting their perceptions and actions. It works upon their pride and lacking sense of identity to eventually use both against them, even as it uses them to achieve the goals and objectives of the lie. What are those goals and objectives? Well, to divide and conquer people, places, and things, then devour and destroy. Its intent is absolute usurped control over all creation to rule it as the absolute hegemonic power ruling through a domination system of co-opted and defeated governance systems. It desires to infiltrate and take over all 7 spheres of societal influence and transformation. That is why we call it the beast which comes from the bottomless pit. More is never enough for its appetites, for its hunger is infinite, which it is attempting to satisfy using temporal means and methods. There is not enough finite temporality to fill the hungers of an infinite appetite. This is seen in addictions. Addiction is an example of both how the addict is a slave to a lie which consumes them, and the nature of the beast of addiction which is devouring them. The fracturing of national narratives and the fabrication of an insufficient replacements, the erosion of the acceptance of objective truth, a portent of dark days. Objective truth and justice is overarching and a meta-societal reality, not a function of societal formulated desires and understanding. The application of and resulting ethical restraints on the society by the society regarding overarching objective truth is where we have a problem. The confusion which resolves by having departed from even the notion of objective truth and justice creates the environment for abuses of power and limiting of broad-based opportunities for citizens. Here wherein is the paradox, the lack of a cohesive national worldview tethered to objective truth and justice leaves the researcher, the business person, the politician, and the soldier alike without a sufficient morally sound and ethical founded structural framework that can offset the problems which arise in brutal subjectivism or its not so identical twin, brutal utilitarianism. What if the majority is corrupted and fractured in their understanding of what is good and what is evil? What is birthed is a state of confusion, forced conformity, bitterness, and insanity. The People's Republic of absurdum absinthium de musicis rebus non discutium de personalis preferences. The same goes with small groups who decide that their subjective point of view supersedes that of the majority or even rationality. What this leads to is the tyranny of personal preferences and their codification into societal institutions by the dictatorial elitists who play the role of the priests and priestesses of the not-so-new cult of self. The rise to preeminence of a deified me, myself, and I pantheon then seeks to consolidate their adherents, both seeking cajole them into action against all that previously had been accepted in upholding society when it was still viable and sane. They gained favor with their cultified constituencies by elevating weaponized subjectivism and personal preferences to the high holy status of compelled doctrine and unquestionable dogma. Having raised the degenerate to absurd heights in the public discourse and centers of power, they next embark upon a systematic war of attrition against any perceived vestiges of the prior societal norms which they deem as a threat against their absolutist personal autonomy which reigns, in their thinking at least, as the sole sovereign power over all things. The cult of the new religion needs a potentate externalized from their projections, which can reflect their own glory back upon them. Now here is where the pageantry of their individual and collective delusions of grandeur hit the wall of reality. Being that each is entitled to be both their own potentate and follower, finding actual consensus breaks down to a point of utter maddening paralysis. The paralysis as such makes toxic any hope to move the nation, much less these pitiful souls' cult of personal preferences, forward towards any meaningful, actionable plan that might have success solving the most pressing national problems. Why is this? Well, in lieu of the banality of majoring on the minors, where they might find some level of agreement, their only option is retreat back to each one's sovereign will, however incongruent it may be, such as a recipe for disillusionment, dissolution, and ultimately fracturing of the illusion of cohesion, which was but a shadowy counterfeit of that which they sought to replace when they embarked upon their great crusade it began with. You see, the problem with such a worldview is that personal preferences are not sufficient to build a cohesive social contract based on anything resembling a firm foundation from which to build one's power base. They are called personal preferences for a reason. A preference is not a transferable objective concept, nor is it bound to being static. Preferences are subject to change at the whim of the individual. Transience is an abject, absurd thing on which to build a lasting social contract with. After all, each person has their own preferences, which are also all subject to transience, thusly not providing for anything but temporary and fractured cohesion with which to achieve a necessary unified movement that can achieve absolutely and maintain absolute power over the society. Personality fracturing externalized into fractured societal cohesion. Moral and ethical restraints can and do fracture in such a vacuum, leading to abuses of people, position, opportunities, and power. The confusion and eventual chaos which results only amplifies the totality of the whole downward trajectory. No nation nor organization or even individual can truly function in a healthy, productive, and free manner under the specter of such timation disorder. No secure nor prosperous society can be maintained in it either. Brute force alone is not sufficient to safeguard the greater good of the society. The greater good must be resident in the society, at large in the citizenry, to uphold the virtues which maintain freedom and liberty within a cohesive and shared fundamental worldview built upon truth, love, justice, mercy, humility, and service to one another, our communities, and the nation. When this is removed as the keystone in society, there be no part of that society which will not be corrupted by what rushes in to fill the great void left in its wake. Once the breach in the flood wall has occurred, the resulting torrent of insufficient, even hostile and destructive influences rush through the breach, bringing with it innumerable national afflictions and sufferings. The breach is not easily repaired. Indeed, it has rarely been mitigated in the nations previous whom venture too far from proper foundations. However, it can be mitigated in the short term and transformed over time. Let's look at how we can do that. The toxicity pathology. The importance of shared authentic experiences to a shared cohesive community narrative. Relationships breathe life into authentic narratives. A shared worldview provides a foundation of common ground for people of like or similar shared beliefs, experiences, and interests. All worldviews are not equal, but many have areas of commonly held beliefs. Some will take issue with this statement because they have accepted a false common ground by wrongly assigning equivalence to all perspectives, beliefs, and ideologies. They will say that all religions are the same, ignoring the fact that if all religions were in fact the same, there would not be multiple religions, but rather one singular one with uniformity of beliefs. This would, of course, be delusional. Every religion so precisely because of their differences regardless of shared commonalities in various aspects. Each religion claims some form of exclusivity based upon internally accepted differentiations, or else they would be assimilated by others. Those who try to smooth out these differences are engaging in a particular form of projected world view homogenization, which is often called syncretism. Interestingly, syncretism has its etymological origin in the Cretan word syncretizing, meaning unite against a third party. Now, what do you suppose this third party is? Well, in this case, it would be against a third party of the original contextual accuracy of the various things being united falsely on faulty grounds. This means they have to water down the essentials of each component, be amalgamated into the new harmonized and unified structure. To do this, the syncretists have to dilute each component down and make alterations to them sufficient enough to create the appearance of sameness to fit their narratives. In doing so, they actually distort and deny parts of these systems of belief deconstructionism in order to reconstruct within the intended syncretized uniformity to fit their personal wishes without regard to the logic or respect of those who are within those various belief systems. So it can be said that the syncretists are actually attempting to create an alternative version of the actual things in order to unite them against the truth of the original things, being that they have to water those belief systems down to achieve the unified soft amalgam. Their new construct is even weaker than those components, and their individual strengths and weaknesses were to begin with. These kinds of ideological constructs are subject to short-duration lifespans due to accelerated entropic effects born of both the means and methods used to manufacture it in the first place. They are in effect making a copy of a copy with successive copies weakening further. Likewise, nothing disarms false narratives like that of looking at them in reverse, seeing them as potential projections from the source exposing what they are themselves are doing, have done, or are planning to do. Unfounded accusations reveal the fears of the accusers projected. They often point out the reflection of themselves in the visage of others, which triggers their fear of being exposed. In other cases, the source of the accusations are deceived by false information or by confirmation bias, which is born from deceptions and faulty perceptions triggering a fight or flight response. It is this paradigm which we now find our mortal corals bombarded by and our souls vexed with the binarium of the simulacrum. The seven heads of chaos, Tiamat, the maddening sea dragon goddess of chaos, is always lurking about seeking to take advantage of the confusion. This manner metaphorical dragon desires to use the chaos to distort, deception, divert, divide, and destroy by causing tumult in and between the sea of the peoples, tribes, and nations. This is likewise true regarding matters of government. I would say that this is as much the target as is the peoples and tribes. All this we are seeing presently. The ancient serpent, beast of false light, is seen clearly in the archetypal red dragon with seven heads motif. The symbols point to a deeper reality of cause and effect. As I have stated in many ways, the seven heads represent the seven spheres of societal influence and transformation. Where and how are the seven spheres used against itself? Well, by sowing confusion, fear, division, conflict, and chaos within the spheres by hostile actors who are agents of distortion, deception, and discord to bring society into the chaos, which is used as a means of diversion to divide and destroy any vestige of resistance against the hostile's objective or conquering the nation and its people. One cannot tame the dragon of chaos by attempting to control it. Chaos, by its nature, infects those drawn into its trap of fear and uncertainty. Rather use the chaos against itself. Then you will find that it will force itself towards order. Using the chaos will allow it to become a useful tool to mitigate it while gaining the advantage over one's adversaries who seek to create it among you. Your unpredictability must be nested inside of your predictable patterns, which lures your adversaries into a trap of their own making. Use their pride against them. Make it appear you are playing to their strengths, exposing their own predictability when you suddenly diverge from your own. This will aid you in turning the tide of its ways for you. The illusion of control in big data and AI. You cannot control all things. You can learn to control what you are able and adapt to the rest when you are aware of what is happening around you. Intelligence is not measured by knowledge gained nor data amassed, but rather wisdom applied and the essential harmonization of the intuitive and analytical as second nature. Big data doesn't mean great knowledge nor wisdom and discernment. It often leads to the opposite. The analytical and the intuitive are not oppositional, but rather mutually dependent upon one another in making proper decisions. To be dynamic and adaptive in ever-changing times, it is important to understand this. Our current national defense planning and policymakers' perspective do not understand this well enough. High-tech solutions are not the magic silver bullet. They are but one part of a proper adaptive approach. A cognitive war is fought first in the 7 spheres by means of authentic relationships in each of the spheres. Do not mistake the tools with the reason you develop them, for the big tech tools are just as easily turned into a vulnerability through over-reliance and overconfidence in them. If those designing AI don't understand themselves as they are, they will impart that vulnerability into their AI. It must be understood that AI is by its nature, well, artificial. The artificial thing is never as good overall as the original authentic one. Yes, it may be faster, it may be able to parse through mammoth data sets quicker, but it is really just a faster clone projection of those who build it. Knowing thyself paradox. Now consider this. If you know not one's own personal insufficiencies and vulnerabilities, or if you deny them in favor of your pride, you are in fact corrupt due to that denial, and pride making you more vulnerable to corrupting influences, increasing your blind spots while still learning more information. It is in applying the information that the real problem begins to emerge. You cannot learn from your mistakes if you are in denial of them. You cannot even identify your mistakes if you are lacking in discernment and humility. Likewise, you cannot see the vulnerabilities and increasing fragility to them because of your prior insufficient perception and corruptible condition. More knowledge will not bandage this gaping wound over time. It will only lead to further and faster degeneration. Here wherein is the problem of many approaches to AI. Means and methods of learning new information does not necessarily mean there will be a depth of understanding as to why it means beyond the comparative data sets and the mimicking of human cognition. There is always the meta. Actual metacognition is beyond cognitive functions. And what of wisdom? Wisdom is not merely smart thinking and decision-making. That is merely a lower-order form of applied analytical processes to data sets. Wisdom has seen its outcomes over time. How do you suppose you will measure it proactively, being limited to linear time? Are you going to build a time machine also in order to prove the outcomes before you choose a course of action? Gamification can present potential outcomes, not absolute outcomes absolutely. Gamification is an approximation of a certain set of variables over a given period of time through projective reasoning. Probabilities are not potential outcomes, not proven outcomes. To love one's life in such a manner is a prison of attempted micromanagement of one's personal environment and those innumerable variables around you at any given time. It leads to mental illness and fear. How is that a wise course of living life? It isn't. Uncertainty is part of the human experience. Applied higher-order wisdom is gained from past and present and intuitively projected upon the future. Some things are universal truths which hold up and are proven over time, but their outcomes. However, even these truths presuppose the individual applying them understands them and applies them in their true context to remain as such. That is difficult to do with absolute accuracy, being that we are subject to misapplication of them due to our own lack of understanding. As I have said, gain knowledge does not mean it is properly understood knowledge, nor rightly obtained or applied knowledge. Here again we have a conundrum. Higher-order wisdom is more than just learned knowledge and experience-driven application. It is also institutive in nature, which is a metalogical concept beyond immediate testability by available means. This is one reason such wisdom is rare among human beings. So what of the meta in the regards to these things? Meta reality is by its nature beyond the immediate testable, observable, and obtainable knowledge-based reality. It is in the other than category. It is a higher order of perception where the intuition and analytical fuse into another state of perception, not limited solely to knowledge obtained, observed, or measurable by means and methods used to authenticate and validate. Some might even call it where the infinite spiritual and the temporal realms meet, and that boundary of temporality is breached in its linearity into the beyond reality. It crosses over the linear into the non-linear boundaries of time and space. It is beyond linear constructs, means, and methods of perception. It becomes a matter of trust and faith that may not conform to accepted norms of verification before apply. That is not, as some would have you believe, a matter of formulaic mechanics. It is beyond it. So how do you trust what is beyond your ability to comprehend or test without having to put your faith in it? You can't. Thusly why I say if you wish to use AI rightly, you must understand both your own and its limitations when put against the actual metaspherical reality which those building cannot see, nor test, nor comprehend, though they wish to build a machine which can. The cognitive battle space is first one which is in the metasphere, meaning beyond the psychosocial, technospherical, measurable, and observable realm of human and technological perception threshold. Though it affects those mentioned areas, you cannot assume the effects of something as the something that is causing the effects. So if you cannot perceive nor test beyond effectual evidence of that elusive thing, in this case being the meta-causality, how would you know if you found it? How would you know your AI had found it? Here the paradox is that you cannot. You must trust that it is with no means or methods in which to verify it. That is faith. So you are in a sense putting your faith in something to tell you something you cannot verify using your own intellect and intuition that you built from your own intellect and projective intuition. Yes, it may be faster, but that does not mean it is better reasoning or more intuitive or accurate now, does it? Isn't that rather like ceding your actual self to the reflection of it in the mirror, either the only difference being the reflection is faster, which has more potential depth of understanding in this case. You are the reflection of you projected outward from your psyche onto the mirror, which returns you the reflection of your image back to you. Isn't that rather like self-confirmation bias? So how do you presume to overcome the inherent projective nature of all human being created by using a created thing made by human being to tell you? Data is data. Calculations are calculations. Sentience is another thing altogether. Being sentient does not mean being wiser or more accurate in real-world thinking, understanding, perception, or effectiveness of applied knowledge. It can, however, increase the complexity of one's ability to deceive one's self. Now here is the big deal. What if those building the AI think they are cognitive of their awareness, but are limited in their depth of being aware by their own misperception of themselves? Meaning, why of their perception of reality, themselves, and their relationship to and interaction with that reality is less than they think it is, being that something of ourselves is imparted to whatever we create and interact with. What if we are corruptible or corrupted? After all, this is clearly seen in human nature, is it not? So if this be the case, how do you suppose a corruptible and or corrupted individual might create an incorruptible thinking AI? Here is where worldview becomes essential. It is also where the failure of postmodern thinking and the hypersubjectivism, which has led to a confused and corrupted society, throws a wrench into the whole AI discussion. The logical mind is not limited solely to logic. It is also subject to illogical thinking and distorted perception inputs and projective workings. If you cannot measure quantifiably your own potential fallibility accurately, how do you think your creations will? On what standard of logic will be your objective standard with which to teach the AI to use as an internal self-fallibility and correction foundation? Subjective perception and reasoning alone is morphological by its very nature, meaning that is it subject to change at the whim of the individual without regards to what is or what may not be logical, having no fundamental basis from which to work beyond ever-changing notions of the reality of something is not a good foundation for making cogent and rational judgments on what something is or isn't beyond the shallows of appearances. Appearances can deceive even the most robust intellects. How are you going to teach AI to be more accurate when you yourselves have need of the meta-spheric concepts of intuitive nature and discernment, which requires something you cannot apprehend, but only see the right or wrong outcomes of? Now think on that a bit while we look at how current psychology understands the concepts of cognitive and metacognitive functions. Meta from the Greek meta, mu epsilon tau, meaning after or beyond, is a prefix used in English to indicate a concept that is an abstraction behind another concept, used to complete or add to the latter. Cognition, noun 1. The mental action or process of acquiring knowledge and understanding through thought, experience, and the senses. 2. Perception, discernment, awareness, apprehension, learning, understanding, comprehension, enlightenment, insight, intelligence, reason, reasoning, thinking, conscious thought. A theory of human cognition, a result of this, a perception, sensation, notion, or intuition. Plural noun, cognitions, perception, discernment, awareness, apprehension, learning, understanding, comprehension, enlightenment, insight, intelligence, reason, reasoning, thinking, conscious, thought. A theory of human cognition, metacognition, meaning awareness and understanding of one's own thought processes. Metacognition is classified as having three components. 1. Metacognitive knowledge. 2. Metacognitive regulation. 3. Metacognitive experiences. Metacognitive knowledge refers to the awareness individuals possess about themselves and other people as cognitive processors. Metacognitive regulation, on the other hand, has to do with people's control over cognition and learning experiences through a set of methods that help people regulate their learning, while metacognitive experiences involve cognitive efforts that are currently taking place. Aside from these three components, metacognition also has three different types of metacognitive knowledge. 1. Declarative knowledge. 2. Procedural knowledge. 3. Conditional knowledge. Declarative knowledge refers to the factual information that one knows and can both be spoken or written. This is also the knowledge about oneself as a learner and about what factors can influence one's performance. Procedural knowledge comprises information on how to do something or how to perform the procedural steps that make up a task. A high degree of procedural knowledge allows individuals to perform tasks more automatically through a variety of strategies. Conditional knowledge, on the other hand, refers to the knowledge about when to use a procedure, skill, or strategy, or when not to. Information as to why a procedure works and under what conditions it works, in addition to why one procedure is better than another. Such knowledge affords the individual a chance to assign resources when using strategies. The folly of knowing not one's self. If those building AI know not themselves, they are not cognizant of the inherent vulnerability of not having done so and continually doing too. What manner of AI do you think such people will create? If one is not conscious of themselves and their own actions and their effects in the totality of the whole human communal experience, how are they presumed to be able to build something that can? For they would not even know the difference between their own reflection in the mirror of their AI and the projection of themselves on their AI. We are to think this more capable than the individual who is consciously aware of these things and put our trust into them to make decision for us. That doesn't sound like a wise thing to do. AI has a contextual place of application. Ceding our decision-making and thinking to it is not one of them. Perhaps this would be a good time to go watch Logan's Run, taking some time to consider at a greater depth the implications of people and societies ceding their most human trait, reason, to a machine in which they place their trust and faith in to do the reasoning for them. Polymathic versus linear siloed. All things are not noble, nor are all things predictable. This will be the case with AI as well. In trying to know and predict everything, one loses sight of what is noble and predictable. Adaptive thinking and doing is more like surfing the waves and being aware of patterns in real time, while remaining attentive to the dynamically changing conditions one is in. This is why it is called situational awareness. The surfboard is not more important than he who guides it. Don't let the tools of the trade become more important than the people who must use them. Likewise it is for strategic and tactical planning, as it is also for the operational realities. Adaptive modularity in planning, training and application makes for more flexible options and faster decision-making. Those who are strategically minded must be cross-trained in tactical necessity, that their strategies might become more actionable at the tactical levels. So too it is for the inverse, that both might more properly integrate both from planning to implementation. This creates a stronger team culture. It is also makes for better planning and operational effectiveness. Nothing happens in a vacuum, so why do so many think that the strategic and the tactical planners are two different things when they are actually two dependent integrated parts of one another? Institutional culture and bureaucratic siloed thinking, that is why problem, transactional, transformational, and relational entropy, cultural vulnerabilities matrix transactional relationships are only as good as trust in those relationships. They are essentially an economic approach to social interaction. This lends itself to distortion, which corrupted relationship into a more mercantilistic approach to how we treat and see one another. This has aided in the erosion of authentic, mutually beneficial, trusted relationships which are necessary for cohesion in society. Socio-economic transactionalism transformed into psychosocial mercantilism, which led to the malady of the hyper-subjectivism of the individual, eroding authenticity, trust, and cohesive community. This paradigm moved to identity crisis and loss of a sense of worldview, family and group affiliation, creating a vulnerability over time to the weaponizing of demographics by hostile influencers, which ultimately fractured and balkanized the national mythos and sense of authentic patriotism. Tribalism along socio-economic and political and decontextualized, distorted world views. From cohesion to fractured demographical tribalism, tribalism replaced the concern for the broader community of communities, being the national cohesion. This has been further fueled from politicized and worldview internal triggering and external fueling. Domestic and foreign machinations and manipulations have combined with the proliferation of social media, incentive models based on numbers, and the distorted social marketing means and methods, which amplify the need of user to hyper-competition for views and followers for monetization of their content. This led to the demographical balkanization and sensational tabloidization of news and information by users and organizations alike. When wedded to postmodern thinking, pre-existing entropy and citizens' critical thinking, and lack of digital media literacy, the perfect storm of ignorance and vulnerabilities created the present environment of confusion, chaos, division, and conflict. Here we also have the complexity of psychosocial cascade effects that impacts neurological and cognitive impairment cycles seen in such maladies as confirmation bias, feedback, blowback loops. These to have spread to all the 7 spheres of society, aggregating and amplifying the macro effects of all contributing factors. See cultural effects of postmodern thought. See the tyranny of competing interests and dictatorial personal preferences. See the effects and implications of weaponized pharmacia and market forces. See the confirmation bias blowback cycle, being that we have developed as an overly hyper-transactional society at the expense of the authentic relational-focused community. The commodification of the social constructs and mercantilistic distorting of our relationship and communities has increased the fragility of cohesion and vulnerabilities to hostile influences in our society. The means and methods of this are more than just technological. The technological means are a type weapons delivery system. Platforms are only as good as their creators and users. The exploitation of them are a function of pre-existing conditions, or rather vulnerabilities, resident in all three. That is where the complexity grows, and the desire to treat symptoms becomes the temptation at the expense of the root causality. Hence why I said earlier that the battle space was prepped over time long before the resulting maladies of their exploitations emerged. To effectively turn the tide, we must first accurately map those means and methods over that period of time to have a proper foundation of diagnosis from which to develop the remedy. Our seeds of our present situation were sown long before the advent of the proliferation of technological means and methods came into play. What most are focused on here are the fruits of the planting which germinated in the nation, not the root causality genesis of the planting of those seeds in the first place. Thusly, we are overly focused on the symptoms and not the root causality. 1. See how this plays out in local and global markets in relation to nation-states and worldviews too. See endemic corruption and financial paradoxes in matters of justice, the roots versus the symptoms, focusing on the symptoms rather than stabilizing the spread of the symptoms and dealing with root causality, leads us to apply the wrong thinking and its underlying misapplication of the knowledge base. This causes us to use the wrong means and methods to address both the symptoms and root causality, furthering the severity, both fueling more poorly conceived reactions. For this reason, we must think differently and be humble in what our various tools, technologies, understanding, and capabilities are actually able to do. We must be willing to be cogent in identifying what is the wise course of action. In this process, we will in fact be taking the very journey which will reveal the very things it can and cannot do to stem the tide of national entropy, as we see that we are already experiencing it ourselves in our own minds and perceptions. We will have to get know ourselves individually and organizationally beyond meta our own preconceived notions, preferences, and biases. This will require brutal realism about ourselves, our organizations, our nation, and the greater global environment. It will not be easy, but it will be necessary. The brutal reality is not about my truth, your truth, or someone else's truth. It is about the truth. Your truth may well be a lie pretending to be what it is not. In other words, your truth is not truth if it is in fact a lie. That means the person proclaiming such things may well be deceived and not simply confused. If someone is in truth, they would not have to claim it as their truth or call others to take a stand for their truth to begin with. Truth is the great I am, for truth is universal, available to all and objectively overarching all things. It is not subject to human perspective, or even having its very existence determined in human understanding to be itself. The truth doesn't need human acceptance nor acknowledgement. Human beings need truth. This is not so for a lie. A lie has to deny the truth and deceive others into believing its distortion of truth is the truth to simply exist. A lie claims to be the truth, when in fact it is a corruption of truth. That is why it is a lie. A lie can never stand against the truth on its own, because it, like a shadow cast into the dust of the ground from a light source, is itself exposed by the very thing it needs to exist, truth. Think on this. If there was no truth, nothing could actually exist, including a lie. For the truth must exist in order for the lie to be a corruption of truth. Yet truth is not dependent upon a lie to exist. Truth needs nothing to validate itself because its very nature is existence and sustains existence. Hence why it need not promote itself to exist nor deceive to gain some level of self-validation from outside of itself, nor does the truth need to slander and accuse a lie. Yet the lie does in fact need to accuse and slander that which is not a lie because it fears its loss of existence being exposed by truth. So a lie is at once both dependent upon and at war against the truth, and a futile battle to maintain some measure of balance between the two conflicting realities. This is faulty idea of the balance of light and darkness, truth and lies is a popular notion fashioned in the Far East. The false balance and the deception of the binary simulacrum now tell me, have you ever seen darkness extinguish a light in itself? Or does the darkness flee from the presence of light, exposing what was previously hidden in the darkness prior to its fight, and then take flight retreating from it? Everything has its proper context, and truth is what puts all things in their proper and intended context. Not so a lie, for a lie deconstructs what is true and corrupts it by putting it into a false contextual framework which, over time, leads to confusion, fear, entropy, destruction, and dissipation. The dross is always separated and burned out of the gold as the flame, which gives light, purifies one, and consumes the other. So to say there is a natural balance between good and evil, and light and darkness, is a deception which telegraphs to humanity what the lie always is trying to do in its miserable state of being: deceive, entrap, enslave, and devour humanity itself. Thusly, this is why the lie projects what it is upon all of humanity in an attempt to convince people the lie is truth and truth a lie. It forces itself upon humanity and attempts to force capitulation to its machinations to self itself, not lead humanity towards a brighter future or the essential well-being and flourishing of people. You see, the lie needs humanity in order for it to continue to exist. This is why it seeks to deceive human beings using the binary simulacrum as a balancing system to keep humanity confused and enslaved to itself for itself alone. And just as the lie hates truth yet is dependent upon it to exist, so too the lie is dependent upon human beings in like manner, which is why the father of lies hates humanity and truth, for it is bound to both for its very life and breath. One might in fact call that manner existence in a state of hell or hellish ever-present turmoil and suffering locked into place by pride on one hand and fear on the other. Those who cannot see this or refuse to see this are enslaved to the lie and thusly blinded by the light, which is why they first deny the truth. Then they fight against the truth and are in the end completely exposed by the truth by their own words and actions. This is why they set up the binary simulacrum. They play both sides of the truth, siphoning off what they can in order to maintain their existence in a fragile balancing act inextricably chained to the futility of diminishing returns. This is what we call the second death. For in denying the truth, to remain in pride, they are in fact destroying their own existence. Hence why I say that the temporary kingdoms of lie are already captured and burning in the lake of fire, which is the spirit of truth itself. Have you not heard the saying, our God is an all-consuming fire? What does God consume? Well, the answer is in what fire gives off. Light and heat. The light exposes, what was previously hidden in the darkness and burns away the impurities, essentially putting back into context what the lie sought to take out of context, to form itself from. Truth. Cycles of the moon's false light, the falsity of the notion of a balance between good and evil and light and darkness is seen in the day and the night. The sun dominates the day and provides light and warmth to the earth, though it is a great distance away from us. The moon dominates the night sky and lights up the darkness, however, with one very big difference. The light of the moon is not its own. The moon only has light because of the light of the sun. Thusly, if the light of the sun were to cease shining, all things in the solar system would be in darkness and chaos. That includes the moon and the earth. The planets themselves would tear themselves apart and cease due to the gravitational forces which hold the solar system itself together, rotating around the sun. This is an example of the light of the truth and the false light of the lie. One needs nothing else to exist, and the other owes its very existence to the existence of the other. It should not be a surprise that the moon was worshipped as the chief of the gods in Babylon. The name of this god was Sen. Yes, that is right. The word for Sen actually comes from the name of the chief of the gods of the Babylonian pagan pantheon. And in Christian belief, sin is the lie. It is what destroys and corrupts humanity, as well as introduce death into the creation itself. I will not bore you with the story of the serpent in the garden who deceived Adam and Eve, other than to say that this portrait is that of the serpent being the father of lies. A lie is deceptive and crafty. It even manages at times to appear to be more powerful and strong than truth. Even so, that doesn't make it more true even in those dark cycles of time and history. Far from it, in fact, it makes it more untruthful, and in doing so still proves the truth as being truthful. For the darker the days, the brighter the light of the truth shines, blinding those bound to a lie even more. Truth need not cajole and deceive to be what it is, not so the lie. And for the deceived, what is a lie? Well, it is their truth despite not being truth at all. Those who are in the grip of a lie claim grace for themselves, are refusing to grant it to others, to claim and retain the right to judge others by their confused standards, or refusing to accept anything which might expose utterly falsity of their claims. Grace is not cheap. The law is not impotent, and truth will not be exchanged for a lie without great and terrible consequence. Nor is truth subjective. One's understanding of truth may be subjective, yet in the end all are made subject to it even if they prefer to deny it. It is not about your truth or my truth. The truth is whether people are or not in the spirit of truth. One is either in truth or a corruption of it at any moment. If it were not so, the world wouldn't be tearing itself apart in confusion, although our various groups claiming to be in truth, when all the consequences of denying it are so resoundingly obvious. Such is the darkness encapsulating a world in which more people prefer the destructiveness of their own pride, which is the root of the lie, to the authenticity of humility and honesty. Yet even a lie proves the truth, and what the truth warns will become of those who serve lies through the consequences lies always brings about. Ironically, by fighting the truth, the lie exposes itself for what it is, insufficient in the light of the truth. Which manner of person are you? A slave to a lie and blinded by your pride, or an individual humbled and being set free by the truth as it exposes all the lies? The causality of the Hippocrates way not one single person among us is infallible. We all make mistakes and get things wrong. The difference between those and the truth versus those who prefer their own truth and those being in a lie is found in how they deal with the actual truth when confronted with it. As I said earlier, those who are in a lie and prefer to remain in it will engage in fight and or flight, triggering choosing to deny even the possibility they might be in error. This manner of rigidity exposes their pride and their enslavement to it, which locks them denial and confirmation bias cycles. They in effect are made subject to the lie and thusly serve its demands to maintain the supremacy of the lie, that it not be exposed and cease to exist within their lives. This is the nature of advanced hypersubjectivism. The great malady of hypersubjectivism is also seen in how it multiplies confusion and chaos as it self-righteously and quite blindly claims the right to project it upon others in its advanced stated attempt to force its sickness upon all people while reserving the right to judge others for the very things it is doing. This is where confusion leads to conflict and chaos. People cannot truly understand evil until they understand the evil in themselves and see it as such. Until they do, they will not be able to more clearly discern what is and what is not evil in people, places, and things around them, and thusly will remain part of the problem of evil rather than becoming part of the solution and mitigating it in their own lives and the broader community which they are a part of. It is for this reason it is said they prefer the darkness in which the lie remains sovereign over their perceptions and actions. The result, well, more confusion, fear, chaos, conflict, and suffering, of course. However, such people will only blame and accuse other people, places, and things rather than let go of their precious pride. As long as humanity judges one another based upon outward appearances, people will project what they are on others, being unwilling to see within themselves what they are so quick to point out in others. In doing so, these same people expose their own hypocrisy. People project onto others what they refuse to acknowledge and take responsibility within themselves. They accuse and slander, never seeing how they are simply pointing themselves out in their own reflection seen in others. This is the Hippocrates paradox. Conclusion: until we each confront the devils within our own lives, we will each project the will of those devils on others, and in doing so feed the devils within their own lives. Thusly, in the denying of our own insufficiencies and shortcomings, we create the very chains which fasten our hearts, minds, and actions to those same devils whose existence does so require it to remain so for their benefit alone. Some might even say we do so provide these devils their needed fleshy sustenance in order to continue onward and downward in our pride and unforgiveness. It is these which devour our lives and cause us to devour one another in all manner of injustices and evils in the darkness. The root of the delusion of our times is found in the rocky soils of our souls. We have in fear, confusion, and pride of ourselves, and what we refuse to see within, created a false world of myth whose foundations were set into sand. We have created a world bound to lies and fueled by confusion, although proclaiming the genius of our folly. One has but to look honestly at the world around them to how well their truth proves all to have fallen pitifully short of the truth. A worldview that denies any difference between truth and a lie is not one which can lead to anything but destructive consequences. Hell is filled with many such people who followed their truth instead of the truth. In doing so, they have proven who their spiritual and intellectual parents are: the father of lies and the mother of prostitutes. As it is for people, so too it is for nations. That postmodernism is indefinable as a truism. However, it can be described as a set of critical, strategic, and rhetorical practices employing concepts such as difference, repetition that trace the simulacrum, and hyperreality to destabilize other concepts such as presence, identity, historical, progress, epistemic certainty, and the univocity of meaning. In other words, it is the logical end to the illogical concept of moral, political, intellectual, and spiritual relativism. Its basis is built upon the premise that there is no absolute truth, but that which the individual declares to be true without any logical grounds to do so. It is inherently self-contradictory logically, as can be seen in its premise. There is no absolute and purely objective truth. This very declaration is self-negating in that by declaring there is no absolute, it is doing so by an absolute. This, of course, is completely absurd and illogical, yet the darkness of the postmodern mind is seen in the fact they claim this self-negating absolute as their mantra, while outright denying or even caring that they are contradictory. In short, they are in a lie, serve a lie, are a people of the lie, and arrogantly deny anything that exposes the lie they are in. Another name for this is prior. Social media and its effects upon freedom, a politically correct insanity. As the effect of social media increased freedom of speech in America, or rather allowed the propagation of censorship to migrate to the individual level or control, and how is this translating into the real world? Are people more willing to discuss things on the basis of reason and facts, or has it fueled emotionism and politically correctness? So in a sense, if this is even somewhat true, we have had the democratization of denial, propaganda, and censorship occur, at least to one degree or another, at the personal level, which is often based solely on subjective perspective rather than meaningful discourse. So could we say that subjectivism and relativism has poisoned the free-flowing water of reason and common sense, and that this has spilled over into real life as we see in Orwellian newspeak talking points reality drive the perspectives and interactions of individuals, leading to emotionality over rationality? And who then benefits from this? Surely not liberty. Surely not justice. Surely not truth. Surely not love. Surely not the citizenry at large. Yet it is the citizenry at large which is being used against itself by its own volition, is it not? The insanity of identity politics in an era of tyrannical personal subjectivism untethered from reality is seen in the degeneration of reason by those who believe that they are the sole source of reality. This is in actuality insanity. If everything in the world subject to the individual's relative perspective apart from any objective overarching reality determining morality and providing a rational basis for an accepted shared context for existing in that reality, what occurs is precisely the kind of absurdity we witness our nation in our times. If one's identity is completely a relativistic thing in regards to gender, race, and derivatives thereof, then anyone can be anything at any time and change that anything at any moment as one sees fit. That would include the rule of law. If everything is relative, then nothing is static, and thusly there is no foundation for anything other than utter chaos and confusion. Let me tell you a story to illustrate what I mean. Worldview bubbles colliding and colluding in a mystical ether I was once asked, Max, why should I not do what is right according to my own perspective? Why do I need God or someone else's laws to govern me? I said simply this: what if everyone is doing what is right on their own eyes, regardless of others, and everyone's version of right and wrong is completely different and completely subject to change at any given moment? And what if some believed it their right to kill those who were not exactly like them and did so? And what if you happen to be one of the ones who believe completely different from themselves, and you and your subjective reality bubble were in danger? What would you do? Call the police? In your society, according to your point of view, there would be no police to call. In fact, there would be no one to call, because everyone else would be living in their own little reality bubbles, without an overarching government to ensure that everyone had some level of pax and security. That being the case, what would you do? After all, your bubble was threatened by a bigger bubble to pop yours. Would you adopt their reality at the sacrifice of yours to survive, thereby giving up your freedom and individuality altogether so as not to be killed? Or would you stand your ground and die? Their response was, I would reason with them. How could you reason with them when reason itself demands something more than a relative point of view to exist? I said, and what if reason was exactly what they hated the most? The woman stood there confused and finally blurted out, it would be wrong for them to kill me in my created reality. I responded in a measured tone. According to who and what would them killing you be wrong? After all, for something to be wrong, there has to be something that is right, and in your world view, you alone reserve the freedom to determine what is right and wrong at any given point in time as you see fit. Would your world view exclude them from doing the same as you? Or don't you think they would as well be doing the same as you, considering everyone is doing what is right on their own eyes and in their own thoughts apart from any objective standard? It was at this point the woman got angry and began to call me all manner of names and accused me of being intolerant and ignorant. She then stormed off, never realizing that she had made her choice, and that choice was to sacrifice her reality to the one she hated in order to hold on to one last thing, her lie of a worldview which had been shown to be utter absurdity. So she did as her fragile fake reality bubble allowed her to do, simply discard it and become something else as it fit her purposes. She was later found shot to death in a parked car, killed apparently by someone who did not subscribe to her relative point of view. This story illustrates the futility in following a completely subjective perspective to construct a totality relativistic identity based in nothing more than person whims and borrowed ideas from other more cohesive worldviews. However, when their super glue and balsa wood reality is changed, they cannot handle it and become offended and enraged that others don't accept their world view and its consequences, as though others were simply automatons designed by their intellects to obey their wishes. The lie in which they exist has such a strong hold over them that they actually believe that others are in fact something like figments of this imagination, which can control by will, no matter how irrational and insane their ideas might be. And when the consequences of the irrationality creates problems for others who don't agree with them, or they are exposed as a lie, they are so owned by their lies they cannot admit it, regardless as to the effects it has on others. The greater power they have, the more they use that power to force others to accept their lie, even if it's only an outward appearance of acceptance. Thusly, they create enemies by forcing their insanity upon others in order to feed the lie they are in. That is what a completely relativistic worldview does. That is the nature of political correctness, and why I say it is insanity posing as having the moral high ground, though it denies the very morality it borrows from to play the self-righteous. It is moonlight, false light, and is whitewash. When allowed to run its course, it will always devolve towards dictatorial control and a type of arbitrary enforcement of its ever-changing rules to keep would-be threats to its continued insanity at bay. And make no mistakes about it, political correctness always leads to its own end due to the fact it becomes so irrational and insane in its outworkings that it eventually creates enough enemies out of those who weren't at the beginning, who put a stop to it for their own sanity's sake. Declaring themselves to be wise, they became fools, and in becoming fools, they became tyrants, who created their own downfall by manufacturing their destruction by those enemies. And to what end? In order that they might go to grave embracing a lie made one with their pride. Thusly, it is why we say pride comes before a fall. As it is for the person, so too it is for the nation and nations. Consider these things. Respectfully, Othniel Max Dave.